Irena's Vow is the life story of Irene Gut Opdyke, who during the Holocaust, she was made the housekeeper of the highest-ranking German officer in Tarnopol, an elderly major. And without thinking twice, she ran to her friends and she said, "I found the perfect place to hide you." And she hid 12 Jews in the basement of the highest-ranking German officer in that town for 2 years without his knowledge. We were the first and only play that's ever been presented at the UN. We were in the Dag Hammarskjöld auditorium. I flew in from Los Angeles for that performance. It was actually a staged reading. And I will say that it was the toughest audience. I've been in show business for 40 years, and I had more trepidation about that than anything I've ever done, because you had a room full of diplomats, people who were very busy, people who may have been there simply because their staffs thought it was a good idea to be there, or because they were curious. Within about 5 minutes, you could see everyone was caught up in it. By the end of the show, people were in tears. In fact, I spoke with one of the diplomats again last evening, who talked about the reverberations of that performance. So it was one of the most extraordinary things of my career. And to step into that place was extraordinary. To perform a play there was extraordinary, but there was also a connection with Irena's story. In Germany, in the DP camp, she was under a Jewish identity, Sophie Soferstein. And there was a UN commissioner on refugees who came to that camp, interviewed her, heard her story, and said the United States would be honored to have you as a citizen. Years later, she came to the United States, she worked in the garment district, she went to visit the United Nations, and she went to the United Nations cafeteria to sit down and have lunch. It was very crowded that day. There were no seats at all left anywhere in the cafeteria except one chair at her table. And a very tall, distinguished man said, "Excuse me, there are no other seats available. Can I take my lunch with you?" And she said, "Of course." And he said, "I have a very bad memory for names, but I never forget a face. I know you from somewhere." And she said, "No, I don't think so, unless you work in the garment district," which is where she worked. And he obviously didn't. He was the UN Commissioner on Refugees who had got her out of that DB camp and got her to the United States of America. They had dinner that night, they had dinner the next night, and 6 weeks later they were married. To come to the United Nations, and as we were preparing to do the show, to be in that cafeteria with Jeannie's daughter, rather Irene's daughter, Jeannie, who once again told that story and said, "This is where my mother met my father, in this room." She fell in love with this man and married this man later. The United Nations was an integral part of her story and part of her life. I think of all the places that this play has been performed and will be performed, that would have probably been the most special to her, because that's where she met the love of her life.